Welcome to Love X Revenge, where stories of pain, courage, and unexpected love unfold in the most unforgettable ways. The dusty wind rolled across the small frontier town just as the stagecoach creaked to a stop, its wheels groaning like they had carried too many stories already. Townsfolk gathered out of habit more than curiosity, expecting the usual, a lone traveler, a trader, maybe a new ranch hand. But when the door opened, silence fell. First, a young woman stepped down, her dress simple but neat, her eyes tired yet determined. She held the hand of an elderly woman who descended slowly after her, leaning heavily on a worn cane. The older woman's breaths were shallow, her shoulders frail, and every movement looked like it demanded more strength than she had left. Whispers started instantly. A mail-order bride, and she brought her mother. Who would agree to that? She'll be sent right back. The young woman heard every word, but she didn't lift her head. Her name was Clara, and she had traveled for weeks across endless plains with only one hope in her heart, that the man who had written those letters would not change his mind after seeing her reality. She tightened her grip on her mother's hand. "We're here, Mama," she whispered gently. At the edge of the crowd stood the cowboy. Tall, broad-shouldered, and quiet, Ethan Hale didn't rush forward like the others expected. He simply watched. His eyes moved from Clara to the elderly woman beside her, then back to the suitcase that looked heavier than any luggage should be. He had received Clara's letters. Honest letters. Letters that never hid the truth. She had written, "I am not alone. My mother is old and sick. If that is too much, you may refuse me." Most men would have. Ethan stepped forward, boots crunching against gravel, and the murmurs grew louder. Clara finally lifted her eyes and met his gaze. For a moment, her breath caught. He didn't look angry. He didn't look disappointed. But he didn't smile either. "I am Clara Whitmore," she said softly. "And this is my mother, Eleanor. I know this is not what most men expect." The old woman tried to speak, but a cough overtook her, forcing Clara to steady her quickly. The crowd waited. They expected rejection. They expected embarrassment. They expected the cowboy to shake his head and walk away. Instead, Ethan reached for the suitcase without a word and lifted it as if it weighed nothing. "My home has room for both," he said calmly. The town went silent. Clara blinked, unsure if she had heard correctly. You mean, we can stay?" Ethan nodded once. "You traveled all this way. You won't be standing in the street." Tears welled in Clara's eyes before she could stop them. Not dramatic tears. Quiet ones. The kind that come when someone shows kindness after you've prepared for cruelty. The walk to the ranch was slow because of Eleanor's fragile steps. Ethan never complained. Not once. When the road became uneven, he moved closer, steadying her arm without making it obvious enough to hurt her pride. The ranch house was modest but warm, sitting beneath a wide sky that stretched endlessly in every direction. Clara hesitated at the doorway. "You don't have to pretend," she said nervously. "If this is too much trouble." "I don't pretend," Ethan replied simply, opening the door. "You're here. That's what matters." Inside, the house smelled of wood and fresh coffee. It wasn't grand, but it was clean, organized, and filled with a quiet kind of peace. Ethan led Eleanor to the rocking chair near the window, where sunlight touched the floor like a gentle welcome. "She can rest here," he said. Clara knelt beside her mother, adjusting the shawl around her shoulders. Eleanor smiled weakly. "Kind man," she whispered. Days passed, and the town watched closely. They expected the arrangement to fail. They expected the cowboy to grow tired. They expected the fragile old woman to become a burden too heavy for any ranch life. But something strange happened instead. Every morning, Ethan left a cup of warm tea beside Eleanor before heading to the fields. Every afternoon, he returned with small things, a softer blanket, fresh herbs, sometimes flowers he claimed he found along the fence line. Clara noticed everything. "You don't have to do all this," she told him one evening. "I know," he replied. "Then why?" He paused before answering. "Because no one should feel unwanted in their last years." Clara looked away quickly, blinking back emotion. Life on the ranch wasn't easy, but Clara worked harder than anyone expected. She cleaned, cooked, repaired clothes, and even learned how to tend the chickens. She never complained, even when her hands blistered or her back ached. One afternoon, a group of townsmen rode up, their expressions sharp. "We heard you took in a bride with baggage," one of them sneered. Ethan leaned against the fence calmly. "Her name is Clara, and the old woman, she'll slow everything down. Ranch life isn't for the weak." Clara, who had been hanging laundry nearby, froze. Before she could speak, Ethan's voice cut through the air, steady and firm. "This ranch isn't built on strength alone. It's built on loyalty." The men exchanged glances but said nothing more before riding off. That night, Clara found Ethan repairing a broken saddle. "You defended us," she said quietly. "I told the truth," he replied. She hesitated, then confessed, "Every town before this turned us away. They said my mother was a burden. Some men even canceled the marriage once they learned about her. Ethan didn't stop working. And you still came." "I had no other choice," she admitted. "But I never expected kindness." For the first time, he looked directly at her. "Kindness isn't rare. People just choose not to show it." Weeks turned into months. Eleanor grew weaker, but she also grew happier. She spent her days watching the open fields, often holding Clara's hand and smiling in silence. Sometimes she would watch Ethan from the window, her eyes filled with quiet gratitude. One evening, as the sunset painted the sky gold, Eleanor called Ethan closer. "You are a good man," she whispered, her voice fragile. "Not because you gave us shelter, but because you gave my daughter dignity." Ethan's jaw tightened slightly, but he nodded respectfully. "She has endured more than she says," Eleanor continued. "Promise me, she will not feel alone after I am gone." Clara's breath caught. "Mama, please." But Ethan answered before she could stop him. "She won't be alone." The promise hung heavy in the room. A few days later, the ranch felt quieter than it ever had before. Eleanor passed peacefully in her sleep, with Clara holding her hand and Ethan standing silently nearby. No grand speeches, no dramatic moments, just a soft goodbye under a quiet sky. The funeral was small, but heartfelt. To Clara's surprise, several townspeople attended. The same ones who had whispered before now stood respectfully, hats in hand. After the service, Clara remained by the grave long after everyone left. "I'm alone now," she murmured softly. "You're not," Ethan said behind her. She turned, eyes red but steady. "You made a promise you didn't have to make." "I keep my promises." Clara studied him carefully. "Why?" "We were strangers." Ethan took a slow breath. "Because once, my mother and I were turned away the same way. A rancher refused us when she was sick. She didn't survive the winter." Clara's heart clenched. "I swore," he continued quietly, "that if I ever had a home of my own, no one in need would be turned away." Silence stretched between them, heavy but comforting. Months later, the ranch felt different, not empty, but peaceful. Clara's laughter slowly returned. She planted flowers near Eleanor's grave. She baked fresh bread every Sunday. And Ethan, who had once lived in near silence, now found himself listening for the sound of her footsteps in the house. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the horizon, Clara spoke. "I came here as a burden," she said. Ethan shook his head. "You came here as family." Her eyes widened slightly. "Family." He nodded once. "You stayed. You cared. You never treated this place like temporary shelter." Clara smiled softly, tears glistening again, but this time, they were different. "Then may I ask something?" she said gently. "You can ask anything." She looked at him, her voice steady yet hopeful. "Did you accept me out of kindness, or because you truly wanted me here?" For the first time since the day she arrived, Ethan smiled. "I wanted you here," he admitted. "From the moment you stepped off that stagecoach holding your mother's hand and still stood tall despite everyone watching." Clara's heart raced. "And now?" she asked quietly. "Now," he said, looking out at the endless land they had built a life upon, "I can't imagine this home without you." The wind moved softly through the fields, carrying away the last whispers of doubt and judgment that once followed her arrival. She had come as a mail-order bride with an elderly mother, feared as a burden by strangers. But she stayed as something far more powerful. Not a burden, not an obligation, but the heart of a home that had always had room for both love and redemption.